welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. All of a sudden, it's pretty easy for people to move around the world, and all of a sudden they are. Poor people moving from poor countries across the globe into rich countries. Why wouldn't they? And again, that's what's happening. Back in 2015, more than 1 million illegal migrants flooded into Europe, and many of them came to Hungary, where we are right now. It was a crisis for the continent, but alone in Europe, Hungary figured out how to solve that problem in a way that we have not figured out here in the United States. How did Hungary do that? How did it preserve its borders and its society? What can we learn from that? Today we took a trip to find out. We'll show you what we found in just a minute. Also, the woes for the country's creepiest governor, that would be Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York, are compounded today, getting even more painful and yet at the same time more amusing. He's even being stabbed in the front by his allies at CNN. We've got that tape for you. But first tonight, good evening, welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. On New Year's Day of this year, Rochelle Walensky was just a college professor in Massachusetts. You almost certainly never heard of her. You definitely didn't vote for her at any point because Walensky had never run for office. As of January 1st, her political power was precisely the same as yours and everyone else's in this supposedly self-governing republic. Rochelle Walensky had 1 vote out of a nation of 320 million people. And then, just a few weeks later, everything changed for her and for the rest of us. Joe Biden appointed Walensky to run the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta. At the time, it did not seem like a huge deal. The CDC is not a legislative body. It's a public health bureau. It was originally designed to fight malaria, and it did a good job. The CDC now gathers information about diseases and then releases guidance about those diseases to the public. That's what it does. The CDC does not make laws in this country. It's not allowed to. Under the U.S. Constitution, making laws is the exclusive role of the Congress. You vote for your senators and your congressmen, and they decide what the rules are. That's known as representative democracy. It's been our system for nearly 250 years. But apparently, it's now over. Rochelle Walensky now makes our laws. Walensky announced today that she has decided to nationalize America's rental properties, millions and millions of them from Maine to California. Tenants are no longer required to pay their rent. Property owners cannot evict them under any circumstances. Making someone pay to live on your property is now a federal crime. Try it and you can wind up in prison with hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. At the same time, you should know, property owners will still be required to pay the banks that hold their mortgages. There is no moratorium on mortgages. Why? The banks are huge Democratic donors, and they're getting the treatment that they paid for. Sandy Cortez and the squad are not calling for the banks to do their part, so they're not. It's property owners who will suffer, many of them members of the rapidly disappearing American middle class. It's hard to overstate what a momentous change this is. It means, among other things, that private property no longer exists in the United States. You thought you owned your home. Not anymore. Rochelle Walensky does. She'll decide who can live there, under what circumstances, and for how long. Is this a good idea? Of course not. It's totalitarian. But there's an even more pressing question at the center of this, a principle that defines what kind of country this is and what kind of country it will be going forward. And the question is this: where did Rochelle Walensky get the power to do this, to suspend private property rights in America? And the answer is, she simply asserted the power. Walensky claims she had the authority and no one stopped her from exercising it. This morning she signed an official-looking order declaring that her opinion is now the law, and so it is the law. But wait, you say, that doesn't seem very American. Shouldn't somebody vote on this? If we're going to continue to pretend this is a democracy, and you hear that on television constantly, then shouldn't our elected lawmakers make the laws? No, and they're not going to. Nancy Pelosi has refused to call a vote on the matter, and she runs the Congress. She decides. Meanwhile, most Republicans haven't said a word about it. And that means that an unelected college professor you'd never heard of 6 months ago is now in charge of your country. If you're wondering how all of this can possibly be legal, rest assured that it's not legal. It's not even arguably legal. We know that for a fact. The Supreme Court has just ruled on this specific question. The court found that the CDC does not have the right to institute a nationwide eviction moratorium. Period. Only Congress can do that. Now, the court didn't make us guess on their view of this. The court put this in writing in the clearest possible language. There's no debate about that. The Biden administration just ignored what the court said. How can they do that? Well, Congresswoman Maxine Waters of Los Angeles understands exactly how they did it. Waters is hardly a genius. It's likely she's never read an entire book. But one thing Maxine Waters knows very well is how third world regimes operate. When you want something, you simply take it. You've got the guns. Who's going to stop you? Might makes right, the Fidel Castro method. Waters explained that out loud today as she pushed Rochelle Walensky to suspend private property. Quote, "I don't buy that the CDC can't extend the eviction moratorium," Waters wrote on Twitter, perfectly aware as she did that the Supreme Court has already prohibited this. Who's going to stop them? Who's going to penalize them? Well, good question. Nobody. And Nancy Pelosi knows that too. Pelosi knows that what Rochelle Walensky just did is illegal by definition. She also understands that openly ignoring a Supreme Court ruling will mean the end of our current system. And that's fine with Nancy Pelosi. Quote, "The CDC has the power to extend the eviction moratorium," Pelosi said. Pelosi didn't explain where that power might come from. She simply declared that it exists, as dictators do. Keep in mind that even Joe Biden, who knows very little, knows that what his administration has just done is against the law. He said that on camera yesterday.
I've sought out constitutional scholars to determine what is the best possibility that would come from executive action or the CDC's judgment. What could they do that was most likely to pass muster constitutionally? The bulk of the constitutional scholarship says that it's not likely to pass constitutional muster, number one. But there are several key scholars who think that it may, and it's worth the effort.
So the eviction moratorium has been in place for months. It has just been extended as of today. So people have debated this, jurists have weighed in on it, and so we know it won't, quote, pass constitutional muster, says Joe Biden. In other words, it's illegal. The people doing it are criminals. That's the word we use for people who knowingly break the law. But like most criminals, they're not embarrassed by breaking the law. That's what they do. Watch Joe Biden's senior advisor, a thoroughly oily character called Gene Sperling, tell you that the rule of law just isn't relevant here.
To date, the CDC director and her team have been unable to find legal authority even for a more targeted eviction moratorium that would focus just on counties with higher rates of COVID spread. This is a president who really understands the heartbreak of eviction. He is the reason why he is pressing and pressing, even when legal authority looks slim, is because he wants to make sure we have explored every potential authority.
These people are so filthy, but they're self-righteous. Did you catch that? We don't have the legal authority to do what we're doing, but we're doing it anyway. Because who's going to stop us? Republicans? Mitch McConnell, please. Mark Milley doesn't report to Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell doesn't control the FBI or the intelligence agencies. Mitch McConnell is unarmed. What's he going to do about it? Give a grumpy speech and drive back to his condo? That's what they're saying. That's what criminals always say when they shake you down at gunpoint. And make no mistake, that's exactly what they're doing, because that's exactly who they are. Charlie Hurd is opinion editor of the Washington Times. He joins us tonight. Charlie, thanks so much for coming on. I never thought that I would live to see a day where the administration would acknowledge in public that what they are doing has been prohibited recently in clear language by the Supreme Court, but they're doing it anyway and they don't care because who's going to stop them because we're armed and you're not? I mean, what system is that?
Yeah, it's beyond unconstitutional. It's anti-constitutional lawlessness. And you ask, why are they doing this? The reason they're doing this is because Democrats control every lever of power in Washington. They control the White House, they control both chambers of Congress, and as you point out, that means they have all the guns, they have all the power. That's why they're doing it. And by the way, this is far more than, although the assault on private property is probably the most appalling, disgusting part of all this, but this is more than just that. This is also an attack on the concept of contracts. And contracts and private property, which of course we inherited from Western civilization, it is why America is the richest, most powerful country on earth. It is why everyone in the world wants to come here, is because private property and contracts are tantamount for us. And this is an assault on that because these people, these Democrats who control everything, want to turn us into China. Because in China, you don't have private property. And anybody who's ever tried to do business, ask any textile worker, ask any furniture maker what it's like to try to enforce a contract in China, and they'll start laughing because contracts don't exist in China. But that's what these people want to turn America into.
So if you're distressed about housing prices, and we've been on this for 5 years, housing prices are completely out of control, and they're highest in the places controlled by the most left-wing members of the Democratic Party, by the way, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York. There are a lot of things you could do about that. You could curb foreign investment in our residential housing markets, which they would never even consider. Why should Chinese investors own huge parts of Manhattan and San Francisco? How does that help Americans? It doesn't. But instead, they're putting all the pressure on middle-class America. So you're renting your basement apartment to someone, and all of a sudden you have to give it away for free because Rochelle Walensky says so? Like, what?
Yeah, and of course, all of this happens at a moment when we as a government, we as a country should be suing China for their involvement in the pandemic, and we could hold as collateral half of Manhattan, which the Chinese business owners and the Chinese government owns, and use that as collateral, sell all of it, and pay everybody that has paid a grievous price in this pandemic. But here's the thing, and this is the most important part of what you just talked about, and that is that the banks are still going to get their cut. You know who's not? You know whose contracts are not being shredded by the CDC right now? It's the contracts that require people to pay massive amounts of money to their electric company and to their oil and gas company. And by the way, to Netflix. Your Netflix contract didn't get shredded because you know why? Because Barack Obama needs to get his $50 million contract paid out from Netflix. That's why they're going after people, private owners who own property, and not after the big guys. Because, by the way, you're hopeless if you don't have an army of lobbyists in Washington with Democrats in control.
That's totally right. Citibank is fine. They paid the protection money that they needed to pay. By the way, why am I paying my taxes? Why is the contract between me and the IRS, you and the IRS, the rest of us in the IRS, still valid? Well, because they have the guns, that's why. Charlie Hurd, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Man, when your day goes bad, it tends to get worse, and that has happened to poor Andrew Cuomo, the creepiest governor in America. Even CNN, which has spent more than a year hiding the deaths Andrew Cuomo caused in New York's nursing homes, has turned on him. Don Lemon, Mr. Don Lemon, ladies and gentlemen, whipped around on Andrew Cuomo last night on television like a scene from The Godfather, and we have it for you. Plus, Ted Nugent joins us later in the show. Rock star and wise man. We're back in a minute from Welcome back from Budapest. Huge waves of human migration really are the biggest story of the age we're living in, and they will certainly define the future. They've accelerated for a couple of reasons. One, it's very easy to travel from one end of the globe to another, easier than it's ever been in human history, and cheaper. But for another, a lot of the world is getting less stable, and in part that's the fault of the West. Ideologues in this country, some of whom now work at the Biden State Department, decided to overthrow the government of Iraq. That caused a domino effect of instability throughout the region and massive waves of human migration. Hillary Clinton decided that for some reason we had to kill the leader of Libya. That started a civil war in that country, and again, more migration. And then for the last 15 years, again, ideologues in Washington have pushed more war in Syria. So all of that had effects. One of those effects back in 2015 was the movement of more than 1 million people from the Middle East and North Africa, and in some cases sub-Saharan Africa, into Europe. Now, Europe is controlled by the EU, which is effectively controlled by Germany. No one says it out loud, but really it's the German Empire. And at the time it was run by the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, and she decided to keep the doors open. She said that accepting more than 1 million migrants in her country was not a big deal at all. Quote, Germany is a strong country. We will manage. Well, of course, she was completely wrong. That decision changed the nature of Germany forever, caused a massive crime spike. Yes, that's true and proven. And in general, disrupted the entire region. It's not clear who exactly benefited from that. Even the migrants themselves, certainly the countries they came from, were weaker as a result. But there was one country in Europe that decided not to play along with this disaster. It's not coincidental that that country is hated by the same ideologues in Washington who pushed the Iraq War. The same people who helped cause this problem are angry at a man called Viktor Orban, who's the democratically elected prime minister of Hungary. And back in 2015, he decided, no, we're not going to allow our nation of 10 million people to be changed forever by people we didn't invite in and who are coming here illegally. And so he put a stop to it. In the face of great international pressure, they called him all kinds of names. The EU called what he was doing illegal. But he did it anyway. He built a wall. And today we went to see it. We took a military helicopter down to the southern border of Hungary, right where it borders Serbia. And we looked at this Hungarian wall that has effectively ended illegal migration into the country. And we found a couple of things. For one, it's not actually a wall. It's a chain link fence. It's very simple. And if you sat for the last 5 years and listened to American experts debate how it's impossible to stop immigration with the wall, no matter how high tech, you learned that that's a complete lie. All you need is the will to do it. So we went down there and we watched that wall and we noticed a couple of things. For one thing, unlike every border we've ever visited around the world, it was perfectly clean and orderly. There weren't piles of trash. There weren't scenes of human suffering because it was under control. Chaos creates humanitarian disasters. That's true everywhere around the world, and it's true particularly on borders, and particularly on our southern border, where there are people suffering and dying because the Biden administration has abetted, in fact, welcomed chaos. But we didn't see that today. We saw order and clarity. You are not allowed to come to Hungary illegally. While we were on the border today, the Serbian border in Hungary, we saw two people who attempted to come illegally. Both of them turned out to be from Syria. And we watched what happened when they were apprehended. It was a very straightforward process, so straightforward that it was a little confusing to watch. They came over the border. They were immediately picked up by Border Patrol. They were brought to a detainment area. They were treated politely. We were there the whole time. They were photographed. They were searched for weapons on the outside of their clothing. And then they were escorted through a door, and we followed them. We thought they're going to further processing or to meet with their attorneys or some Soros-funded NGO, and then moved into some other part of Hungary to stay there forever, at least a few years. But that's not what it was. That door was the border. And as we followed them through, they were escorted back where they came from, into Serbia, and they can apply for asylum somewhere else. That straightforward immigration policy, no, you're not allowed to come here illegally, I'm sorry, this is a real country, we have laws, works. And it doesn't require a GDP the size of the United States' GDP. It doesn't require high-tech walls or guns or surveillance equipment. All it requires is the will to do it. And as we watched this happen, we said to a Hungarian minister who was standing there, it's hard to believe that's your policy? When you come here illegally, you're just escorted out politely? And he said, quote, we're a serious country. How embarrassing to be an American in a conversation like that, to realize the greatest country on earth is not on some level a serious country because it allows the chaos that inevitably occurs, the human suffering that inevitably occurs when you open your borders. By the way, we couldn't help but notice that on the Serbian side of the border, where the migrants are massing, trash and filth everywhere. Boy, does that tell you a lot. So it was a deeply revealing moment, and we're going to have more. We've had a number of them here in Hungary. It's a small country with a lot of lessons for the rest of us. And one last thing. Because the example of Hungary is so powerful, not just in Europe, but to the world, to the entire world, not simply the West, what you can do with a relatively small economy and not many people, if you're just serious about keeping your nation from being destroyed, because the lessons are so obvious and there's such a clear refutation to the policies we currently have and the people who instituted those policies, Hungary and its government have been ruthlessly attacked and unfairly attacked. It's authoritarian. They're fascists. There are many lies being told right now. That may be the greatest of all. The last Hungarian revolution was less contested than our last revolution, and probably more transparent. That's true. It's not an endorsement of anybody, but that's true. So ignore the lawyers, the liars rather, and the lawyers, and judge for yourself. Is it working in Hungary or not? We think that it is. Well, it turns out, and we learned this yesterday, that it's always the people you most suspect. Andrew Cuomo is every bit as creepy as you thought he was. According to the New York's Attorney General, Andrew Cuomo will grope anything. His staff, state troopers, Al Gore, he even ogled his own Emmy statue. So after the AG report came out, virtually every Democrat in the country called on Andrew Cuomo to resign because they had no idea he was a creep. It was a big story, but it didn't get any of the coverage on television, at least on the show anchored by his brother on CNN. Instead, Chris Cuomo attacked Ron DeSantis. Right. There's a governor we can hate. And then Don Lemon took over. After telling his friend Chris that he loved him, he unsheathed the knife.
I'm going to make my witness, as you say, and you know what? Make your witness. I love you, brother.
I love you, D. Lemon.
All right. This is Don Lemon tonight. The calls are getting louder and louder. This is what I'm talking about. Top Democrats from New York to the White House calling on Governor Andrew Cuomo to resign. That in the wake of the bombshell report from the state's attorney general that alleges the governor sexually harassed 11 women, including state employees and a New York state trooper. The report also says that he retaliated against one woman who went public with her allegations against him. And the president of the United States couldn't be more blunt. Question: should Governor Andrew Cuomo resign? Answer: yes.
They all seem so surprised that there's something wrong with Andrew Cuomo. They had no idea. You know who knew? Matt Walsh knew. He hosts the Matt Walsh Show. He joins us now to tell us how surprised he is to learn this. Matt Walsh, were you shocked to learn that maybe there was something wrong with Andrew Cuomo, or did you know that already?
I can't say that I was, although Andrew Cuomo, as you point out, his excuse or his his rationalization is that he's a creepy pervert to everybody in public also, so we shouldn't be surprised. So that's one reason I'm not surprised. The other reason is that, of course, he condemned thousands of elderly to their deaths by locking them in rooms and in buildings with people who are infected with a disease that we know primarily kills elderly people in nursing homes. And the thing is, I knew that, we all knew that, the media knew that way back when they were talking about how they were Cuomo-sexuals, and they were going on and on and on about how great Andrew Cuomo is, and he had his book tour and everything. They knew that, and they knew that he killed elderly people, and they said, well, what are you going to do? And then it turns out that he made some women on his staff uncomfortable, and now we have to draw the line. Now, look, we could say they're both bad, right? It's bad to kill elderly people. It's bad to flirt with women who aren't consenting to it. That's true, but one is so much worse. I mean, it's like saying that John Wayne Gacy, yeah, he killed 30 young men, but he also abandoned his shopping carts in parking lots without putting them away. They're both bad. I mean, yes, they're both bad, but the fact that this is the thing that takes him down, I think, says a whole lot about the media and our society.
Yeah, I mean, Chairman Mao was insensitive to trans people, which I think we can both agree was his real crime. So what you're saying, and I know you're not a licensed ethicist here, you don't teach at Yale Law School, but you're saying it's worse to kill people than it is to hit on an armed state trooper. Is that what? I just want to be clear for the kids in the room tonight.
That is the radical suggestion that I'm putting it forward. I don't want to force anyone to believe it, but I'm putting forward the possibility that maybe killing literally thousands of old people in your state is probably a little bit worse than making inappropriate comments. I'd read the report. I mean, he said things like, he called some of the women on his staff single mamas and really, really horrific things. But even so, I would still say that the primary thing that should provoke our outrage is the fact that he is a known killer of the elderly.
Tweaking feminist sensibilities worse than murder. Really quick, what do you think this is really about? I mean, I assume no level of sincerity at all among Democratic leaders at all. So clearly they wouldn't be, they stood by Ted Kennedy after he killed a girl, literally killed a girl, and they never criticized him. They're now knifing Andrew Cuomo. What do you think is actually going on here?
That's a really good question. Originally, I thought that, well, this was their way of distracting from the nursing home scandal because they'd rather talk about this than that, because the nursing home scandal implicates, by the way, a lot of other Democrat governors who did the exact same thing.
That's right.
And I thought maybe that's the reason, but then again, people have moved on from the nursing home scandal, so why do they need to talk about it now? Maybe it's that the powers that be in the Democrat Party don't want him running for president. That could be it. I have no idea, but whatever the reason is, it's nothing good.
Can I just make one super quick prediction? If he resigns, whoever we get in New York is going to be worse. I'm just throwing it out there. And that's a big statement considering how just awful Andrew Cuomo is. But do you think that's probably right?
Well, I mean, yeah, look at Bill de Blasio. Bill de Blasio is the mayor of New York City. So that's the level of leadership we have. And as he manages somehow to be worse than Andrew Cuomo. So it can only get worse, unfortunately.
That's always the argument winner. 2 words, Bill de Blasio. You're absolutely right. Matt Walsh, great to see you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
So you thought Barack Obama had retired from the presidency. You didn't realize he just assumed a new role as an Ottoman sultan. 200 servants at his birthday party on Martha's Vineyard. But there has been a change tonight. No, the party is not canceled. But you now might have to pitch in for Barack Obama's birthday gift because he's not rich.
He condemned thousands of elderly to their deaths by locking them in rooms and in buildings with people who are infected with a disease that we know primarily kills elderly people in nursing homes. And, the thing is, I knew that. We all knew that. The media knew that way back when they were talking about how they were Cuomo-sexuals, and they were going on and on and on about how great Andrew Cuomo is, and he had his book tour and everything. They knew that, and they knew that he killed elderly people, and they said, well, what are you going to do? And then it turns out that he made some women on his staff uncomfortable, and now we have to draw the line. Now, look, we could say they're both bad, right? It's bad to kill elderly people. It's bad to flirt with women who aren't consenting to it. That's true, but one is so much worse. I mean, it's like saying that John Wayne Gacy, he killed 30 young men, but he also abandoned his shopping carts in parking lots without putting them away. They're both bad. I mean, yes, they're both bad, but the fact that this is the thing that takes him down, I think, says a whole lot about the media and our society.
Yeah, I mean, Chairman Mao was insensitive to trans people, which I think we can both agree was his real crime. So what you're saying, and I know you're not a licensed ethicist here, you don't teach at Yale Law School, but you're saying it's worse to kill people than it is to hit on an armed state trooper. Is that what? I just want to be clear for the kids in the room tonight.
That is the radical suggestion that I'm putting it forward. I don't want to force anyone to believe it, but I'm putting forward the possibility that maybe killing literally thousands of old people in your state is probably a little bit worse than making inappropriate comments. I'd read the report. I mean, he said things like he called some of the women on his staff single mamas and really, really horrific things. But even so, I would still say that the primary thing that should provoke our outrage is the fact that he is a known killer of the elderly.
Tweaking feminist sensibilities worse than murder. Really quick, what do you think this is really about? I mean, I assume no level of sincerity at all among Democratic leaders at all. So clearly they wouldn't be, they stood by Ted Kennedy after he killed a girl, literally killed a girl, and they never criticized him. They're now knifing Andrew Cuomo. What do you think is actually going on here?
That's a really good question. Originally, I thought that, well, this was their way of distracting from the nursing home scandal because they'd rather talk about this than that, because the nursing home scandal implicates, by the way, a lot of other Democrat governors who did the exact same thing.
That's right.
And I thought maybe that's the reason, but then again, people have moved on from the nursing home scandal, so why do they need to talk about it now? Maybe it's that the powers that be in the Democrat Party don't want him running for president. That could be it. I have no idea, but whatever the reason is, it's nothing good.
Can I just make one super quick prediction? If he resigns, whoever we get in New York is going to be worse. I'm just throwing it out there. And that's a big statement considering how just awful Andrew Cuomo is. But do you think that's probably right?
Well, I mean, yeah, look at Bill de Blasio. Bill de Blasio is the mayor of New York City. So that's the level of leadership we have. And as he manages somehow to be worse than Andrew Cuomo. So it can only get worse, unfortunately.
That's always the argument winner. 2 words, Bill de Blasio. You're absolutely right. Matt Walsh, great to see you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
So you thought Barack Obama had retired from the presidency. You didn't realize he just assumed a new role as an Ottoman sultan. 200 servants at his birthday party on Martha's Vineyard. But there has been a change tonight. No, the party is not canceled, but you now might have to pitch in for Barack Obama's birthday gift because he's not